Dacotah Bank is a 550 roughly employee organization. We serve 29 communities in North and South Dakota and 2 in Minnesota. If we flash back to 2015, was really when we started our relationship with MDA. And what was going on was we had several key members of our market leadership we were having some turnover. If you think about banking in South Dakota, we're a significantly ag-focused organization. We're typically in the top 15 in terms of ag lending in all of the United States. We need leadership in those small communities, which is obviously difficult to find sometimes. So we had some turnover in 2015. At the same time, we also had some open positions for some of those key revenue-producing lender roles. And so I think that was really the impetus for we need to do something. We need to be proactive. We got behind the ball. We were reactive to succession planning in some ways, and we got ourselves into a little bit of a bind. And so that started the process of what is the next step for us. In the first academy graduation, about a little over a year ago, they had all of the presentation to the senior leadership team. They had all of them stand up, and they said, if you're going to retire within 5 years, you can sit down. And I think just about everybody sat down. And so it was a great visual, and I think it really hit home for that group in the audience of what the challenge is. I mean, it's one thing when you look at the age bands, and we have charts that come out of our data warehouse and our talent management, and when you see the pie charts of age distribution, but when you actually see that knowledge base that is going to be leaving the organization, it really hammers home the need for that next group to come in. To that last statement I made about the legacy and the importance of leadership, there's a very, very real sense in our organization with the senior leadership group, especially the I would say 4 or 5 key leaders. They are very intently focused on what has gotten us to this point. They don't want the momentum to stop, and they don't want the organization to get stagnant or fall behind. So over on the left, we have our nomination process, and we talked earlier about the question was, how do you select talent? This is again where we call out to our top 35 managers in the organization and say, who's on your list of who you think might be a candidate for the academy? And we pull that in, we do an assessment inside with some of the analytics we have, and then we extend an invitation to a number of them, have them apply formally, and that gets them into the program. That red pre-program, that far left column, is really about awakening and aligning, but it's a very valuable set of assessments that allows individuals who may not have formally gone through an assessment process on any level start to get some context for self-awareness. Start to get some tangible definitions of what they've innately known about themselves, both in terms of strengths and weaknesses, but also start the process of what's next. And that comes through our individual development plans. We assign a coach from MDA to each participant, and through the coach and through that individual's mentor and their manager, we put together a comprehensive individual development plan that focuses on those strengths and weaknesses, the learning impacts for them as individuals, for their teams, and for the organization. And it's a very comprehensive process, and I think that really lays the groundwork and gets everybody on the same page in terms of what expectations are for the individuals as they go through the next 10, 11 months. As we go through from the yellow box to the black box, key things that we touched on, I mentioned earlier stakeholder management. We had a session with leadership presence. That was a key learning. A lot of our individuals are very task-oriented, operationally focused, as you would expect in banking. Teaching them about leadership presence, about how to present themselves, not just in a customer contact format or with their employees, was very important to us. It helps aid them in communication across lines. High-impact conversations was a big one. The last key learning that I would mention is design thinking, where you're expanding your vision of what is possible and then converging and then continuing to go through that. And it's something that we really implemented into the action learning solutions themselves and really challenged those teams with. And I think that the result is that we got much more robust solutions. So for our organization, and I think every organization is going through a similar heavy change environment. And financial services is no different. If anything, I would say that we're on the forefront of change. Fintech, AI, everything that's coming down the pike is really things that we're wrestling with right now. Just because we're operating in rural markets, our competitive advantage is starting to slip away. One of the great things that's come out of this program is not just how we've influenced those participants and how they've grown in their ability to manage change, impact change, influence change, but the organization as a whole has started to become more agile-minded and innovation-focused. And even though we can't compete on a dollar basis with the multinational banks and financial services organizations, we're looking at things very differently than we did 5 years ago. Thinking back to that business case I mentioned earlier about having that bench strength for leadership positions. When we look at our first academy, we had 14 go through. During the program, 4 of them became market presidents. So 4 of them moved into that role that I was talking about earlier. I think we had 2 have since moved into senior vice president roles, and we have 3 or 4 others that are in management roles, key management roles that we have pegged for some succession planning. So that's how we measure our impact, is the readiness. I can tell you that if you sat in the steering group in our organization and you asked them 2 years ago, what is our readiness for the future for the next 5, 10, 15 years? You would have had a lot of uncomfortable looks on the faces. I think that if you asked that group today in that context and said, how do you feel Dacotah Bank is prepared for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the responses will be significantly better. And so in addition to some individual metrics, we do that. From the actual setting aside the development and looking at the solutions themselves, we've implemented versions of our first academy's the 2 project teams. One of them was an enhanced internship program that got implemented this year. And then the other one was focusing on our culture and amplifying it. And so we actually created a culture committee out of that that involves a lot of our senior executives, and then a swath vertically and horizontally across the organization. We're starting to be more purposeful in measuring our employee engagement using some analytical software, and we're starting to see results from that. The second one was on what we call non-interest income. We're about $6 million behind peer in that context, and so even just a slight uptick in that will really be meaningful in terms of an ROI. And so I see that over the next 3 to 5 years, back to your question earlier about the ROI or the kind of the role definition, if we can make up just a couple basis points in that area, then that in and of itself justifies the investment, let alone everything else we talked about.
Need help developing your high potential program? Let's begin a conversation.